Let's get the junk science out of sleep. What's up, Active Lifers? Welcome back to the Active Life Podcast. I'm Dr. Sean Pastuch, and I'm your host. Today, I am joined by Dr. Kirk Parsley. Again, this is part 2 of our interview series with Dr. Kirk Parsley about sleep. We didn't know it was going to be an interview series, but the first episode was so informative and so useful that I thought we would do it again. On this podcast, we break into what supplements work, what science is real, are wearables actually valuable for you, or are they just selling you a bill of goods, and what is the best thing for you to do to make sure that you are sleeping better. This podcast was really tactical. We dove into the weeds, and I think that it's the one that you're going to be able to take and really apply towards your lifestyle on a day-to-day basis. Remember, if you're finding this podcast interesting and valuable, head to wherever you're listening, leave us a rating, leave us a review, and share this with a friend. Value shared is better than value hoarded, right? You don't want to be the person who holds on to all the information. Share it with your friends, rate the podcast, review the podcast, help other people gain the value that you got from it, and let's get to the show. Dr. Kirk Parsley, the fastest turnaround from first podcast to second podcast in the history of the Active Life Podcast.
Hey, I got to be the fastest at something.
That's
certainly not going to be running anywhere. So
that's fair. Since our last podcast, it was so interesting. It was almost immediately after you and I chatted. I was a guest on a podcast. I was going into the city, right? And the night before, my kids were just waking me and my wife up. And I think I woke up at like 1:30 in the morning and fell back to sleep. Probably sometime around, 4 or 5, the sun was starting to come up. And the only reason I know that is because I was walking my kids back and forth to their bedrooms, right? And I have a skylight in the hallway. Our bedroom's completely black. And I did not check my clock. I'm gauging, right?
All right.
But based on the way I felt the next day, I go to this podcast. It was the first time in my life that I was conscious that I was not hearing all of the words that this person was asking me. I was not computing what they were trying to get at. I was trying so hard to focus on what they were saying. And it just, you became very prominent in my brain in that moment about what do we do when we know I got a big thing tomorrow, and tonight the sleep just didn't happen. There is no going back.
Right.
What do we do?
Yeah. Well, so, the general rules of the morning don't change, whether or not you've gotten good sleep. So I think we probably talked about on the last podcast, when you don't get enough sleep, the way your body compensates is by releasing more stress hormones, right? So, cortisol is called the stress hormone. There's actually lots of stress hormones, but that's the primary one people think about, and it gets a bad rap as though it's a negative thing, and it's not. I mean, cortisol is a hormone that's designed to keep us alert in proportion to our environment, right? So, if you're in fight or flight, right, that's the most alert you'll ever be because you're in a situation where your life is in danger, or your well-being is in danger at the least, or somebody you love, care about, is in grave danger as well. Either one of those situations, your stress hormones go so high that you essentially become superhuman, right? Your pulmonary tree dilates, you take in more oxygen than you can ordinarily take in. Your heart rate increases, your blood pressure increases, your pupils dilate, you're taking in more light. All your senses get better. The vascular beds in your skin shunt so that you don't bleed very much if you get cut. Your pain threshold goes up. That high level of cortisol mobilizes all your stored glycogen. Your blood glucose goes up. So now you have energy, you have oxygen, you have high pain threshold, you have faster reflexes. Unfortunately, your prefrontal cortex shuts off because that's the region of your brain that allows you to think and reason and plan. And you don't want to think, reason, or plan when you're in a fight or flight situation. You want to react. So that's one of the things that allows your reflexes to be faster. So when you're just a little sleep deprived and you don't have enough energy to do what you need to do during the day, you don't have enough attention to do what you need to do during the day, your body compensates by increasing cortisol. Now, the reason we don't run around in the state that we're in when we're in fight or flight, right? Because it'd be nice to have that extra strength and endurance and pain threshold and reflexes. Like, it'd be great to just have that all the time, right? Mm-hmm. Like, why don't we just run around like that all the time? Well, because it's very catabolic, which means that you're using your body as a fuel source. And you can only use your body as a fuel source for so long before there's no more fuel and you die. So when you don't get enough sleep and you have a little extra cortisol to wake you up, you're still feeling like crap because it's just enough really to wake you up. So you still need to do the same things that will increase your cortisol level, right? One of the first things that you want to do in the first 20 minutes, 30 minutes of the day is to go out and get some bright light. If you can't get bright light, and you can do it within indoor lighting with some pretty high, has to be like 10,000 lux. It has to be like a pretty high light load, and it doesn't go straight in your eyes. It's like 30 degrees above your eyesight, because that's where low sunlight would be, and that actually increases cortisol level. Excuse me. But it also starts changing the metabolism and neurotransmitters of your brain and how your body's dealing with, your hormones and how it's dealing with your blood glucose levels and all that other stuff. Everything, you start entraining your circadian rhythm, but that entrainment of the circadian rhythm actually leads to an increase of energy as well, an increase of performance, let's say. And you can do the same thing through exercise, right? So doing some fairly intense, like I wouldn't do enough to like wear myself out, but like if I knew I'm really sleep deprived, and I've done this because, ironically, when I lecture on sleep, about half the time I'm sleep deprived because of the sleep, because of the travel schedule and the way things unfold. It's just like, I'm only going to get 6 hours of sleep tonight before I do my sleep lecture. Happens all the time. So I get up in the morning and I get my bright light in and I do, something like burpees, but I'm not going to do like a real workout with it. I'm just going to do enough to like really get myself kind of gassed. And for me, that's not that many. I mean, I probably 20 and I'm like, my heart's racing and I'm breathing heavy and it's like, okay. And then I go about getting ready and I'll do a few more. I'll do something similar to that. Make sure I take the stairs. And of course, caffeine. I mean, caffeine does work. It blocks. It blocks something called adenosine receptors in our brain. When we break down, when every cell in our body is using ATP, it's adenosine triphosphate, right? So it's an adenosine molecule with 3 phosphates. Every time you take off a phosphate group, it releases energy, and that's how the cells do their work. And when you end up with just adenosine in the brain, that's your brain. That's a signal to your brain that you're tired and you need to go to sleep, and that causes sleep pressure. So when you drink caffeine, it blocks those adenosine receptors. Doesn't do it for that long, which is why you feel a crash after coffee, because your adenosine's continuing to build up, and then the caffeine goes away, and then you feel even worse. But if you got to get through a podcast, you got to get through a lecture, that works well. Modafinil, also called Provigil. That's a great alert enhancing drug. It works on several neurotransmitters. To be honest, we don't know exactly how it works. We just know that it works on several neurotransmitters that will keep you, alert throughout the, 6 to 8 hour range with a single dose of that. And it doesn't seem to interfere with sleep. If you take it sort of first thing in the morning, you go to sleep at a normal time later that night, you should get a decent night's sleep. Nowhere near as hard on the adrenals and the brain as like a stimulant like, Ritalin or Adderall or, those types of things, which are essentially, those are just forms of methamphetamine. There's other forms of meth. So those have a heavy physiologic toll. So I wouldn't rely too heavily on that. There's some over-the-counter supplements that can help people. A little bit of acetylcholine, about 150 milligrams of acetylcholine helps you concentrate. I take that every day, before I come and do like administrative type work. That's just a really taxing thing for my brain to do, like categorization, like that type of stuff's really difficult for me to do. So I make sure I have that. The one thing that I would avoid is you'll crave sugar, you'll crave carbohydrates, because the only reason we're the only animal on this planet that sleep deprives ourselves intentionally. Every other animal will only do it if they're being preyed upon. Like, so if they're being stalked, they'll only sleep as much as they have to, or if they're in famine. So evolutionarily speaking, it's a reasonable assumption to think that our brains probably perceive sleep deprivation as, danger, like we're being stalked, or perhaps famine. And so one of the things, what you'll crave during famine is fat and sugar, which is why we deep fry sugar bread, and call that a donut, and eat and drink some coffee on top of that to block the adenosine. And that's how we deal with sleep deprivation. But that you don't need that glucose influx, because the average American has way more stored glycogen than they need. So that extra cortisol is going to keep your blood glucose high anyway. So I wouldn't go for the sugar that you're craving. I'd go for fat and protein to keep yourself from having that glucose crash that's inevitable.
So a little recap there is, you didn't sleep well the night before, but you have something big going on. The best options for you: get some sunlight, exert yourself physically enough to get a little bit winded, not enough to be beat up from your workout.
Yeah. Don't exhaust yourself, or you're just going to crash harder. So just enough to get yourself tired, like one set of something. If you're exercising, something enough to just get your breathing heavy, and just do that intermittently,
Mm-hmm. And then, instead of eating sugar and carbohydrates, focus on your proteins and your fats. Even though your body feels like it wants the carbohydrates, that's just a little trick. Your brain thinks you need that burst, but you don't.
And one of the things that cortisol does, because it's catabolic, it starts using your muscles as a fuel source for amino acids. So protein's a really good thing to take in when you're under high stress hormones.
I see. So the cortisol that you're releasing is in excess. And so what will happen is it'll break down your muscles, pull the amino acids out of your muscles. And so eating protein supplies us with the amino acids that we would otherwise be pulling from ourselves. It shuts down the cortisol response, and our body says, okay, I'm good now. I don't need this. Then
you'll still have the cortisol response. You won't have to break down your muscle to get the protein,
right,
or to get the amino acids.
Right.
Yeah.
Then the next thing you said was acetylcholine. And I'm interested in learning about acetylcholine, because it's a supplement I've never taken myself. And I'm interested in learning first of all, I know that the answer is it depends. What are the ranges of how much somebody would be taking of that? Is it an all day lasting thing? Is it to take it right before the task? Talk to me about what acetylcholine is and how it works.
So acetylcholine is the primary neurotransmitter, right? So not just for your brain, but for your peripheral nervous system as well. Like one neuron, you think, they can have it can be pretty long, and it has a little cleft at the end that secretes neurotransmitters and communicates with other neurons to cause muscles to fire, or regions of your brain to activate, or whatever it's doing. Interpret sensory, but acetylcholine is one of the primary neurotransmitters. So if you're depleted on acetylcholine, which does happen, that's one of the things that happens when you're awake for too long. As you stay awake longer and longer, the neurochemistry of your brain shifts, and it shifts obviously towards a less productive way. One of the reasons is a slight tangent. I won't go too far off it, but one of the things that gets secreted by the adrenals as well as cortisol during stress is epinephrine and norepinephrine. And epinephrine is adrenaline, essentially, and norepinephrine is adrenaline for the brain. And that makes you feel alert, which is what makes you feel alert during fight or flight. But it also shuts down the prefrontal cortex. It interferes with the functioning of the part of our brain that makes us the smartest animal on the planet. And so you don't want to rely too heavily on adrenaline that will keep you alive, but it's not going to help you function intellectually, problem solving, cognitively, verbal fluency, all that stuff. Not going to be better. So you're better off by replenishing the normal neurotransmitters that are involved in that, which acetylcholine is one of the primary ones. So we have things that we call alert. We have neurotransmitters that we call alert promoting neurotransmitters. There's really no neurotransmitter to cause you to go to sleep. It's the lack of wake promoting neurotransmitters. Once the wake promoting neurotransmitters go low enough, you're asleep. So it's a tautology, circular definition, but the best definition of being asleep is the lack of being awake. So you want to increase wake promoting neurotransmitters, in which acetylcholine is one of the primary ones. Now, what is the dose of it? I don't know, to be honest. I work with, probably a few thousand people at this point, definitely in the high hundreds, if not thousands. And I work with them on these types of things. I've never seen anybody do well on, I say, above about 500 milligrams of acetylcholine. The problem is the brand matters. Supplements aren't that well regulated. They're horribly regulated, in fact. And so you can get one brand that's that says it's 500 milligrams, and you're maybe getting 100 milligrams out of it. And you can get one that says it's 100 and you're getting 500. They're not that great. So you go with high quality brands. If you're interested, the one I take is Now in NOW. It's orange label with blue and white writing. And about 150 milligrams seems to be right for most people without getting them too excited. But some people just need more. Either it's not getting into their blood-brain barrier very well, or they're somebody who just requires a lot more of it. But I've never seen anybody go over 500 and do well. When you start going too high, you'll notice it has the opposite effect. You'll be really distracted. Your verbal fluency will go down. Your brain's kind of scattered. You'll have a hard time concentrating when it gets too high, and you'll feel kind of a little hot and higher pulse probably.
It's like giving yourself ADHD on purpose.
Well, sleep deprivation gives you ADHD. And so, it's really hard. So really what we're trying to compensate for is the lack of the prefrontal cortex working, right? And that's all ADHD is, right? ADHD isn't even necessarily a deficit in attention. It's inappropriate attention. People with ADHD can very often hyperfocus. Like a lot of neurosurgeons have ADHD. A lot of transcontinental pilots have ADHD because they can just focus on, this 1 millimeter square for 7 or 8 hours and then be like, what happened? They forgot everything else in the whole world was cloud. They wouldn't know it. But if you look at the symptoms of ADHD or ADD, and then you look at the symptoms of sleep deprivation, they're identical.
That's interesting.
And about 80% of school-age kids are sleep deprived right now. So I always tell people, hey, if anybody ever tries to diagnose your kid with ADHD, you make sure that your kid sleeps well for a week or two before they go in and get testing. Even if you have to pull them out of school, or have them miss a couple of hours of school every day, make sure they get good sleep for a couple of weeks before they go in, because you can't tell the difference between those two. And I think that's why there's a couple of reasons, but I think that's one of the main reasons that we have such an epidemic of ADHD in America. It's because we have such an epidemic of sleep deprivation. Everybody competing to get into college. And so staying up late to do their homework and getting up early to go practice their sport or activity or whatever club they have to be in to be competitive for the school they want to go to. Bit of a tangent, but yeah, 150 milligrams to 500 milligrams is the answer to the acetylcholine.
I'm surprised you don't have an acetylcholine line or you have your sleep remedy, which I do want to talk about. I'm surprised you don't have your wake remedy.
Well, I'm actually just about to launch four different supplements about 2 months apart. I've wanted to, well, I've always wanted them. And I developed a sleep remedy while working with the SEALs with their sleep issues. And I gave them all the daytime support stuff. But I never wanted to, I never wanted to be a supplement salesman. And like as a doctor, like I want somebody else to make the supplement. We can talk about it whenever you want to, but like the whole evolution of all that. But the SEALs really harangued me into making it. Like I didn't want to, like they were going out and buying each ingredient individually. And this was pre-Amazon days. So they were having to go, to 3 different stores and, buy, this powder and this liquid and these pills. And, these run 90-day supplies. These are 30-day supplies. And it was a mess. And they just wanted me to make a product. So I was like, all right, I'll just step away and I'll step away from brick and mortar for a year. I'll launch this thing. I'll put somebody in charge of it. I'll go back to practice. Right. That was 9 years ago. And I'm still running the damn business. But we never raised any money for it. It's like me, Peter Attia, and Rob Wolf just like threw in some change out of our pocket. We started this thing for nothing. We've never really tried, like I've tried to make it as big as I could being part-time as a doctor just through influential friends and stuff. But like, we've never really had a proper company around it. And so now in the last year or two, I've kind of developed a real company, a real corporate base with some really good employees. And so we just decided about 3 months ago that we're finally going to launch. So like, I'm going to do like you're talking about, like an adrenal support, weight promoting one. And then I'm going to do a male hormone and a female hormone.
That's great.
One, and then like a daytime stress formula.
Well, yeah. I think the reason why I like hearing that is because of what you said before. It's the supplement industry is so unreliable. And so you don't even know, you don't know what you're buying. You don't know if you're buying.
That's a very kind word.
I'm a kind guy, Doc. I'm a kind guy.
They're smarmy. It's a smarmy industry. That's the way I've always described it. Well, because I tried to have somebody just make the product for me. That was my first thing. I was just like, oh, I'll just work with some supplement company. And man, they were like,
right. Well, I started thinking about if I wanted to source all the different ingredients that I would use, right? He's mentioning acetylcholine in the morning. He's mentioning, the sleep remedy. You've already made it for the evening. I'm like, well, now I have to know if the acetylcholine I'm buying is acetylcholine.
Right.
Even if you buy like the pure product, is it actually the pure product? There's so much. So it's good to hear that you're going to be releasing some of those other things.
Yeah.
A small aside, not to take us off track too far. A little trick for the people who are waking up really early to get into those clubs to make themselves attractive for college. I was in a lot of clubs to get into college, and I never was in any of those clubs. They didn't check. Right? Like push it a little bit. I'm not telling you to lie. I'm telling you, I went to, I attended meetings for the following clubs. That's good.
Right. Well, I can, a tangent to your side. When I went to college, so I was a high school dropout. I had to go to junior college for 2 years just to be able to get into college. And I thought, well, I should go to the best college I can go to because the medical schools will care that I got a 4.0 from this college versus that college. And when you apply, you haven't even finished college yet, right? You're applying during your junior year. And all they do is have you list the courses that you took. There's prerequisites for medical school. You have to have this much biology, this much chemistry, this much OChem, like whatever. You just list the courses that you took and the grade that you got. Mm-hmm. Nobody gives a crap where you went. And I was like, man, I could have gone to San Diego State and gotten 4.0 with hardly any effort. But I go to UCSD. It's like, I think something like 80% of the students starting UCSD are pre-med. So it's like you're competing against, like every like super serious student in California is going there. So it was that's my advice to people for those types of things too. No, there is no adjusting for that. Like, they don't really care.
Yeah.
Unless, I mean, I guess if you went to Harvard or Yale or Columbia or something, like, maybe, but anywhere else, just like, doesn't matter.
I can echo that. I took all the really hard prereqs, the organic chemistry, the biochem, the 1, the 2. I took those at community college and I just didn't let them affect my GPA. But so, a question for you about sleep deprivation. Is it something that you can train to be better at? And I want to be careful. I want to put a disclaimer out there. I'm not looking for a hack for how people can live sleep deprived. What I'm looking for is, I just go back to that podcast I was on, and I'm like, it was a big opportunity. It was a great show. I think I did a good job. I know I could have done a better job, and it eats at me. And so what I'm thinking about is there a way that I could prepare myself for those moments when it's going to happen, right? It's going to happen again if I want to keep going on podcasts and speaking on stages. Is there anything that I can do or that anybody can do to prepare themselves to perform better when they're sleep deprived?
Yep.
What is it? What is it?
I'm going to throw it right back at you. Is there anything that anybody can do to be better at a novel exercise?
Yeah. So I had a feeling you would. I had a feeling you would go this way. I just wasn't sure if it was making it worse. Like there's sometimes when it's like, hey, actually putting yourself in that situation is not such a good idea. But I'm hearing it's be sleep deprived.
So it's just like, hey, if I like, the CrossFit games kind of started that way, right? It was like, hey, you're going to show up and anybody's best guess if you're going to have to run a marathon or, do 1 rep maxes, like who knows, right? Mm-hmm. So what's the best way to prepare? Well, just
do all of it.
Be good at everything, right? Be healthy. And so, that's one of the reasons I'm not crazy about super restrictive diets, because you need to be resilient, right? You need to be metabolically resilient. You need to be psychologically resilient. You need to be physiologically resilient. And so the best way to be good at sleep deprivation is to be really well rested most of the time and to be in really good shape, to be in good physical shape, to be in good physiologic shape, to eat well, to control your stress well, sleep, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, sleep is the foundation of everything. I say that's the platform. I used to say there are 4 pillars of health: sleep, exercise, nutrition, and stress. Now I say, well, there's 3 pillars that sit on the platform of sleep. So sleep is the foundation because everything else depends on that. If you don't sleep well, what you eat doesn't matter nearly as much because you can't, your body doesn't partition the fuel well. You really shouldn't be exercising intensely if you aren't exercising well, or if you aren't sleeping well, and then you really, all you can do by controlling your stress if you aren't sleeping well is minimize the damage that you're doing to yourself by not sleeping well. Mm-hmm. So sleep is the foundation. You have to do it, but then, eat the way you evolved to eat, move the way you evolved to move, and, learn 5 or 6 different ways to control your stress. Just controlling your stress a tiny bit. And one of the ways to control your stress is to cause stress and rebound from it. That's what the ice baths are about, which I should have mentioned. That would be a good thing to do in the morning if you're sleep deprived. It doesn't have to be an ice bath if you don't have one. Just like, put the shower on cold for the last 30 seconds to a minute of your shower or something. That stressor, that increases cortisol level, but it changes a lot of your physiology, changes, things with heat shock proteins get involved, and you start cellular metabolism starts changing a little bit. But anyway, the best way to be able to handle sleep deprivation is the same thing that makes you the best at handling a novel diet or novel exercise or a high stress situation. It's just being very resilient, being very good at everything, right? So you know, most of what everybody's looking for, they're looking for short-term solutions or medical solutions for lifestyle problems, right? And it's all about lifestyle. If you live a good, solid lifestyle, I mean, I get sleep deprived 20, 30 times a year, just because, the way I travel and what I do for a living, and it just happens. And I'm fine. Like I can handle the day or two of poor sleep because I sleep 8-9 hours a night, almost every other night that I'm not sleep deprived. And I eat well and I exercise regularly and I, get my sunlight and I control my stress all day. I'm very good about recognizing when I'm feeling under a little stress and just taking a break and doing a little breath work, going on a walk, whatever it is I need to do some stretching, do some progressive muscle relaxation, do a little meditation, whatever it is. And I just kind of settle myself down. And every time you do that during the day, you bring your stress down a little bit. And it teaches your body how to bring your stress down, and that's one of the big things that will get in your way with anything novel, whether it's sleep deprivation, a change in your diet because you're traveling, or changing your exercise because you try to do some stuff with your friends you aren't used to doing, or, divorce or bankruptcy, a child gets sick, parent gets sick, something like that. Like your best bet for being able to handle that is having a good lifestyle.
You mentioned, I mean, you just made a whole statement about lifestyle, and I want to jump to that for a second, because what I see a lot of people doing these days is trying to adjust for not having a great lifestyle, in terms that one that promotes health and well-being, by taking supplements, by hacking, by doing all these little things that are meant to, well, you don't need to do this if you take this. If you don't need to do this if you take this. Right. And I think, and it's interesting because you have a sleep supplement that you sell, and I believe in it, right? And it's something that I'm going to share in the show notes so that people can find it. And so I find myself in this position where I'm like, well, there's use for some of this stuff, and then some of this stuff you've just been sold the bill of goods. And right. If I'm understanding you correctly, what you're really saying is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if you're doing all of these things, you don't necessarily need a sleep supplement. It's the fact that we know right. Most people are not doing all of these things. And if the platform on which everything else lives is sleep, and you're going to take one supplement, it might as well be the one that helps you to build the platform on which everything else can live. Is that correct? Right.
Right. Yeah. So the way I describe it to my clients is, now keep in mind, I mean, the one rule that I'd say the most important rule about health that everybody needs to understand, whether they think they're an expert or they think they're complete novice, the most important thing to know is that we don't really know anything, right? Like we act like we know a lot of stuff and we don't. Like everything we think we know right now, at least half of that will be proven wrong in the next year or two. Mm-hmm. So the best possible thing that you can do, and the way I build the foundation for every client I have, is I say, hey, you've been evolving for millions of years. This body is at least 100,000 years old, probably 200,000 years old. Meaning, if you could fertilize an egg and a sperm from back then and implant it today, there'd be no difference in how that human turned out, because this body is old and it's been on this planet for a long time and it evolved. I mean, we are part of the planet. We aren't on this planet. We're part of it, just like trees are part of it. And so we have a role, and like we were designed to go to sleep when the sun goes down, and we were designed to wake up around the time the sun comes up, because we're very visual animals and we can't see at night. And so it makes a lot of sense. And we're not very tough, strong, fierce fighters without, weapons, so like we're pretty vulnerable animals. So, we evolved to be on this planet, and we know how we evolved, right? Like you don't have to know a whole lot. You can just use your imagination from what little you know about history, and you can think, all right, well, what did people eat 200 years ago? How did people sleep 200 years ago? How physical were people 200 years ago? Like it's pretty obvious, right? Like you don't need a whole lot of education. But now we have all these other gadgets now, right? Now we can look into your genes. We can see like what sort of what sort of SNPs do you have? What sort of little changes in your genes do you have? We can look at all sorts of blood markers. We can look at hormones. We can look at peptides. We can look at metabolic markers. We can look at micronutrients. We can look at your heart rate variability, your blood pressure. We can do all these tests, and we can say, hey, we know this is the ideal way for you to live. Like I can see like, how do you handle carbohydrates? How do you handle proteins? How do you handle fat? How does your body fuel partition? What is your clamp test? If I give you this much glucose, how well do you assimilate it? All this stuff. And I can now keep in mind, I'm only testing for that moment, and your body's dynamic and it can change 50% in 24 hours in most things. But, let's say you trusted all the science and we tested everything we could. And we'd say, all right, here's ideal. Like, here's the ideal line. You live all this stuff and this is the ideal way to live your life. And here's the litany of all the things you can do. Realistically, unless your entire life is built around living the ideal life, meaning you don't have any external drivers, you aren't going to ever have any sick kids, you don't have any demands being made by other people in your life, you don't have to go to work, you don't have to worry about money, you don't have to worry about where your food's coming. That's not realistic. If you could live ideally, this is the best science can tell you what to do. And 99% of that's going to be live like you evolved to live. Okay. But let's just say we're going to use all the science and we're going to figure out exactly what you need. Well, here's reality, right? This is as close as you can get. You do everything you can, like, bam, I'm this far away. What am I doing here? That's where you supplement. That's what the word supplement means, right? It's supplemental. So I don't care if that's, like, I don't really know how to meditate, but I need to meditate. So I wear, What Are the Muses, and it teaches me how to meditate. Or I use diurnal beats to help me meditate or something like that's a supplement, right? An ice bath is a supplement. A sauna is a supplement. Nutritional supplements are supplements, peptides, hormones. Like there's all sorts of things that you can do to get closer to that ideal. You'll never hit the ideal, but you bridge that with supplemental activities and supplemental compounds and supplemental gadgets and all that type of stuff. So that's where I fall out with supplements. And truth be told, the way society's developed, the way the enormous variability in the quality of food you're getting from day to day from the same grocery store. Definitely when you go out to restaurants, you have no idea. The lack of organ meats, we can live as carnivores, right? And we can live quite healthily as carnivores, but all carnivores prioritize organs, right? You look at a lion doesn't eat the muscles of any animal he kills. He eats all the organs, right? That's where a lot of the nutritional density is. So with the lack of us doing a lot of that stuff, supplements are more likely to be needed. We, as I said, we're a couple of 100,000, at least 100,000 years old, but 100,000 years ago, we were all much closer to the equator than we are now. And so the vitamin D supplementation is almost a certainty, even when you get up, as far from the equator as Austin, I'm not super high up there, but definitely up in New York, you're going to need vitamin D supplementation probably 9 months out of the year. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that's my spiel on supplements.
Well, what I find, the argument that I hear often that my lizard brain goes off and says bullshit. And I'm curious if it's bullshit or if I'm just, convincing myself that it is the accepted reality that the nutrient value in a carrot today is less than the nutrient value in a carrot 100 years ago. And so we could eat 3 times as many carrots and we wouldn't get the same amount of beta carotene for example, as we would have gotten from one of them 100 years ago. And so without supplements, we actually cannot achieve a complete nutrition panel. That comes across to me as maybe, but it just doesn't seem like
I think it's unlikely. I think you're right. I think it's unlikely. Definitely there are soil differences with monocrops, right? Big corporate, big corporate farming is where most of the grocery store comes from, right? If you're buying locally, you're probably getting what you would have gotten 100 years.
That's what I'm thinking.
Ago. But if you're buying from a big corporate, farm, they have 100,000 acres of one vegetable or whatever, one fruit, whatever they're doing, and they're obviously, turning over their soil and putting a bunch of fertilizers and pesticides and who knows what else. So that's possibly a problem. And it's not something that I would thumb my nose at, but the only way to really know is to test, right? And what I find when I do, when I test when I do a metabolic panel on somebody, I'm looking at their micronutrients. It's pretty typical what people are low on. So I think something like a multivitamin, multi-mineral, just something simple. It's like an insurance policy, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, because today maybe my magnesium's fine. 3 or 4 days from now, maybe my magnesium's low, right? You go, okay, what's the big deal with magnesium? If I don't feel any different, why does it matter? It's like, well, because of a million things, because of a million chemical reactions going on in your body. One of the things we know, if you're magnesium deficient, you're more likely to form atherosclerosis. If you have higher magnesium levels, then your arteries don't calcify as much. Why is that? I don't really know. I don't think anybody really knows, but we know that that's a correlation. So, maintain your micronutrient density with, a simple supplement, I think. And you don't need to go buy some, $300 a month male female kit. Just buy yourself a good, mineral supplement and vitamin supplement. Usually you can get it together.
Well, what I find most paradoxical about that whole situation is I think everybody, even in that category of saying all of our nutrient density is less because of monocrop farming and all this kind of stuff. Those are people who are also aware that regenerative farming and most local practices are going to give you a totally different product than what you're going to get from that other place. So they know where they can get the food source that is not deprived of those nutrients. The other thing that these people know is that eating your food is going to be better than supplementing with any pill that is not that nutrition in its natural state. And so the gap in price that you're going to pay for the better food is probably similar or even less than the nutrition, like the supplement stack that you're going to put yourself on. And if you're in the category of knowing about this, having awareness around this, both of those things. So why not just buy the better food?
Well, I would push on that, and just that I'm not exactly sure the nutritional density of everything that I get.
Right.
And something like a multivitamin, multi-mineral, I can probably get for $15 a month or something. Right. So it's like 50 cents a day. And I'm taking that as an insurance policy. If I don't need it, I'll pay it out. Right.
Sure.
It'll just be wasted. But if I do need it, I've got it. And I'm not saying it's essential, to health. I'm with you. Buy the best food you can buy and source locally. But I travel about 120 days a year. So then that's kind of blown out for me. Right. I source my meat from local ranchers, so that's no problem. But when you're talking about fruits and vegetables, I'm really only getting them from the grocery store. We have a farmer's market here, but it's 4 hours on a Sunday. And if I don't happen to get it to that Sunday, it's like, well, I'm just going to buy something from the grocery store. And so I agree with you that, you could certainly get by without it. You could certainly get by without it. To me, it's a kind of a simple no-brainer. So what I don't like, as far as hacks, first of all, I hate the word hack, because the word hack to me means that you're trying to get results without doing the work, right? That hack is a cheat, right? It's a way of getting a reward that you haven't earned. And so I don't like that concept. And so I don't like the concept of like, well, if you put butter in your coffee, then you don't need to do these other normal parts of life or something. It's like bullshit. Like you need to live the best life that you can possibly live. And then you can figure out what little supplement things help for you. And that can, that could be something you add to your coffee. That could be a multivitamin or multi-mineral that you take. That could be, like I said, that could be ice baths or saunas, or that could be meditation software, whatever it is. Supplements to help, you can take something like phosphatidylserine during the day and it lowers your cortisol levels. If you're stressed out all the time and you're not really good at controlling your stress, well, that's a reasonable investment. Like you're going through a divorce, you're going through a bankruptcy, going through a tough time with your business. Take this supplement, for the next 30 to 60 days, whatever, and get off of it. As long as you have an exit strategy, you're not using it as a crutch to avoid doing what you need to do. Then I'm all about supplementing in the truest form, but not expecting supplement. I'm not expecting a supplement to, I'm not expecting a supplement to take the place of me doing the right thing. It's just, it's sort of a mitigation. It's an insurance policy when I think I'm doing the right thing and I'm not getting enough, or when I know I'm not quite doing the right thing, it's a little bit of a mitigation tool to keep it from being as physiologically expensive.
I want to move off supplements and I'll come back to them later on because I want to learn about what's in Sleep Remedy and answer some questions that I've gotten from people when I've started telling them about it. But in the meantime, one of the things that I've heard a lot of doctors asking their patients to get tested for that I've almost never, I can't think of it. I'm sure I have, but I can't think of someone who's come back negative, is getting tested for sleep apnea. And, and so I'm curious your thoughts on that, because it's one of those things where like my parents, right. They're one of their doctors was like, you should get tested for sleep apnea. And they both were like, fuck that. Like everybody who gets tested ends up on a CPAP, and it can't be possible that everybody has.
Isn't that just a hell of a coincidence?
Yes. So I would love to hear your thoughts on
like,
that.
Hey, we do this test, and if you fail this test, we give you this device. Mm-hmm. Which your insurance company tens of thousands of dollars.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a hell of a coincidence. So one of the things that I get ripped for all the time is telling people the sleep apnea is 95% of the time is a lifestyle disorder. I'll briefly cover some things. I could go deep in this for 3 hours, but so one thing that we know for sure is that chronic sleep deprivation leads to sleep apnea. Why is that? Well, it's hard to say exactly, but here's one postulate. This is my postulate, my favorite one at least. So we talked about how when you don't get enough sleep, you increase your cortisol level, right? You increase your stress hormones. We don't just increase them during the morning, you increase them throughout the whole day. And now when you're trying to go to sleep, there's a threshold of stress hormones that will allow you to sleep. If your stress hormones are too high, right? So if you had a long, hard day and you lay down in your bed to go to sleep, and then a car crashes into the front of your house, are you going to just go to sleep anyway because it's time to go to sleep?
No.
And you're not going to feel sleepy either. You're going to be wide awake because there's this big stressor and you're going to have a ton of extra stress hormones. And so one of the things that people don't recognize is that your stress hormones are progressively getting higher, right? Because if I sleep great all the time and now I don't get enough sleep today, last night, say I slept 6 hours instead of 8. Now I need more stress hormones to get through today. And so now when I'm going to go to sleep tonight, my stress hormones are going to be a little higher. Well, one of the things that allows us to go to sleep is having low enough stress hormones. They're supposed to progressively get lower through the day. So if my sleep pressure is high enough, just meaning I'm tired enough, I've exhausted myself enough, I can go to sleep with high stress hormones. But as we talked about last time, the most anabolic time of your day. So the time when all of your anabolic hormones, all your sex hormones and all your anabolic hormones are being made and regulated, weighed and measured, and the sensitivity to them is being adjusted. That's all happening during deep sleep. Deep sleep is the lowest stress hormones you will have during any 24-hour period. Ideally, your stress hormones should be almost unmeasurable during deep sleep. And then they progressively go up. Like your first sleep cycle is almost all deep. And then the next sleep cycle is a little less deep and a little more REM. And that progresses until their last sleep cycle is like almost all REM and very little deep. And throughout that time, so you're not doing as much deep sleep, your stress hormones are creeping up throughout the entire night. And then at some threshold, they're going to be high enough to wake you up. Well, if I'm going to sleep with high stress hormones, I'm still going to go into deep sleep, but I'm not going to go as deep. It's not going to be as anabolic. I'm not going to get as much recovery. And now if I sleep 6 hours again, I'm probably 4 times as bad off. If I slept 8 hours, just because I had high stress hormones, it might have been the same as 6 hours. And now I'm still going to need more stress hormones the next day. See what I'm saying? So yes. You're increasing your overall load of stress hormones, which are catabolic, and you're keeping those high like all the time. And now you're having a hard time going to sleep. Well, have you ever been in fight or flight? Like you ever been in a car wreck or a fist fight or nearly a fist fight? You're like, and you notice that heaving, that type of breath that you're doing, right? You're not necessarily breathing faster, but you're using all of your accessory muscles. That's because stress hormones partially paralyze the diaphragm. So if you have high stress hormones while you're trying to go to sleep or while you're asleep and you've impaired your diaphragm, when you go into REM sleep, all of your skeletal muscles get paralyzed because REM sleep is when you're dreaming. REM sleep is when you're rehearsing everything you've learned. You're rehearsing every experience you had through the day. You're reliving it. You're figuring out where to categorize emotional events. You're figuring out how to make sense of certain things that confused you during the day. And if you've learned anything new, like you're forming durable connections between that new information and old information so you can access it and be smarter or be better at whatever skill you're learning or something like that. So you don't want to act that out, right? Because if you're rehearsing, say like you're boxing, if you've trained in boxing all day and you're going to rehearse it at night while you're asleep, your wife doesn't want you rehearsing that for real, right? So your muscles are going to be paralyzed so that you're not punching anybody while you're asleep. Well, now you only have your diaphragm. And if your stress hormones are high enough, right, to where they're impairing your diaphragm, well, now your diaphragm has to pull really, really hard. And if you're snoring and your airways collapse a little bit, which is also a product of low anabolic hormones, so testosterone being one of the primary ones, they set something called neuromuscular tension, right? So if you tell me, in your work, you tell people to do this all the time. You'd say, totally relax, like relax this, relax that, whatever. Do they completely relax, right? Can you completely turn off a muscle? No. That's how you can tell someone's dead. Like if you see someone dead on the street or in a coma, like somebody's like their bodies look weird because they aren't holding the same shape they normally have. So we have a certain amount, like there's a certain amount of neuromuscular tension in my bicep that makes it always look like a bicep. It's not completely flaccid. And that is set by anabolic hormones, androgenic hormones more precisely, and acetylcholine, one of the things that we talked about earlier, that's involved in it as well. So if my neuromuscular tension is higher, my muscles have a little more form. Well, that's the same thing in my palate, right? So the back of my throat has all these muscles that's holding my airway open. If my anabolic hormones, androgenic hormones are low, which happens with chronic stress, and it happens with chronic sleep deprivation. It happens with one short night of sleep. So getting 6 hours instead of 8 hours can lower your testosterone by 30% the next day. But if I have chronically low androgenic and anabolic hormones, then my neuromuscular tension point is lower. So my muscles don't have as much tension. And when I lay on my back, my airway is more likely to collapse. And now if I have stress hormones also slightly impairing my diaphragm and I have a collapsed airway, well, that's causing me to snore. And my diaphragm's having to pull past that. And when my diaphragm can't pull past that, it causes me stress. And then I wake up and I use my accessory muscles. I use my chest muscles and my obliques, and I use my intercostal muscles to help me breathe. And so I wake up. And that's sleep apnea. I stop breathing. I wake up to breathe. I stop breathing. I wake up to breathe. I stop breathing. You don't even have to be aware of this. Like you can look at this in people's sleep studies. Some people wake up, 300 times per hour. They don't have any memory of it, but they're just waking up enough to breathe. The same thing happens. We talked about last time, like people moving around in their bed. If you have an uncomfortable bed, if you have, joint pain because of, orthopedic injuries or a saggy mattress or too hard of a mattress or whatever, the bed gets too hot, you cut off blood supply, you move. And every time you move, you wake up to move. So those are all interfering with sleep. And a certain amount of that is just inevitable. You're going to have to move around in the middle of the night. But every time I tested, when I first started dealing with sleep in the SEAL teams, every single SEAL that I tested had sleep apnea, every one of them. And I was like, well, okay, this isn't possible. Right. That doesn't make any sense. If 100% of the guys that I test have sleep apnea, then sleep apnea must be normal, right? Mm-hmm. Right. By definition, right? It doesn't make any sense. But what you find is that when you get people to sleep well, and they get a high quality of sleep and they decrease their stress hormones, decreasing alcohol and sleep drugs, obviously that affects it as well. And you improve their anabolic hormones and magically their sleep apnea goes away. Now, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine will tell you that you can't get rid of sleep apnea the same way the American Endocrine Society will tell you that you can't get rid of type 2 diabetes.
Right.
But I'm here to tell you that I do both all the time. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, you can get rid of their sleep apnea. And the interesting thing is, like, it's a self-cascading cone, right? It's a self-propagating downward spiral. So if you have sleep apnea, if you sleep poorly, then you don't get good quality of sleep. You don't wake up rested. You need more stress hormones. Now you need more stress hormones to get through the day. Your stress hormones are higher when you go to sleep. Now you don't get you don't get as good of sleep. You have sleep apnea, you're getting even worse sleep. And now you're just getting worse every single day, right? You're getting progressively more tired. A lot of people, you can break the cycle just by getting them not to sleep on their back. Mm-hmm. And here's how complex that is. You go buy yourself one of those T-shirts that have a little pocket here, right? Mm-hmm. And you buy it a size too small, and you cut that pocket off. You have a tailor do it if you don't know how to sew. You cut that pocket off and you put it right in the middle of your spine, right between your scapula. You sew a tennis ball in that pocket, and you wear that T-shirt to bed for 30 days, and you won't sleep on your back anymore.
Huh. That's interesting. And you're not going to find yourself waking up in the middle of the night a million times because you tried to sleep on your back and the tennis ball was there?
You'll notice it for a couple of days. Probably you'll have some memories of it. And after that, you'll just quit trying. Like, you'll just quit rolling onto your back. Give yourself 3 or 4 weeks with it, even when you don't feel like you need it anymore. Just make sure you break that habit. And when you sleep on your side, about half of people's sleep apnea goes away just getting off their side.
That's amazing.
And then that's going to improve the quality of their sleep. That's going to improve their sex hormones. That's going to improve their stress hormones. And they're going to have all sorts of benefits from that just right away. And then they might be able to go to sleep on their back, 6 months later after everything's renormalized. Maybe they do sleep on their back here and there and they don't have sleep apnea anymore. But every single patient I've ever had, I've gotten them off of their CPAP. And that includes, 75-year-old patients I've had. Well, 72 is the oldest patient I've had.
Now you say you've gotten them off. Does that mean that you've weaned them off, or it means as soon as you got them, you were like, get off that machine. It's not useful for you?
No, I've optimized their lifestyle. I've gotten them off their back. So that's the first thing. I always get everybody off their back. First thing, there's lots of reasons to not sleep on your back. But I get everybody to quit sleeping on their back. And then I work with their nutrition and their exercise and their stress, and if they need any hormone modulation, and obviously not everybody needs hormones, but they might need some supplements or a little bit of pharma to help kickstart their hormone production or balance their hormone production. And then I'll just have them go retest and say, I usually don't do it before about 6 months. I work with people for a 1-year program. And then about 6 months into it, I'll say, go get another sleep study. And if they don't come back without sleep apnea, they come back with, probably 10% or 20% of what they had before. You say, okay, well, let's give it another 6 months and, just keep optimizing your lifestyle and then test again. And their doctors always have some excuse for, what happened, but it's never what I did. It was never because they were working with me. It was always something else that that none of that stuff works. So,
right. It's amazing how that is, isn't it?
It's totally overdiagnosed, just like anxiety disorders are overdiagnosed, just like ADHD is overdiagnosed. It's just, again, it's the system, the healthcare system, if you want to call it healthcare system, which is a misnomer, but the healthcare system, again, it's offering medical interventions for lifestyle problems.
Right. Well,
if you improve the lifestyle, you don't need the medicine almost always. And I consider CPAP to be a medical device. It's a medical intervention.
Well, it's interesting. I've heard several people now, and I've heard it for years, but now that my reticular activating system is focused on it, I'm hearing over and over and over again, like you can't monetize healthy lifestyle. And so instead we monetize drugs, machines, and all these kinds of things. And I'm inclined to believe that we can monetize healthy lifestyle. It's just that the people who would be able to monetize it have less power, less authority, less attention, less credibility today than the people who are monetizing things like pills, machines, and shots and surgeries and things along those lines.
Well, I mean, the COVID vaccine proves that, right? Because look at the machine that was involved in promoting that vaccine.
Right.
Imagine if they would have used half of that $300 billion to educate people on vitamin D supplementation and zinc and getting good sleep and exercising more, and like the benefits of the simple things that they can do to improve their immune system and their overall health and their overall resilience. I mean, we know the biggest risk factor for dying from COVID was age. The second biggest was obesity, right? I know one person who died from COVID, and he's my age. He was this buddy of mine I went through SEAL training with, and he was 125, 150 pounds overweight. Mm-hmm. Everybody else I know who had COVID was relatively fit. That was my age, had COVID,
right?
Got sick and whatever. Like, I had COVID, my partner had COVID. Like, it wasn't great. It wasn't a fun time, but it wasn't by far the worst thing I've been through in my life either. Why? Just because we're healthy, and nothing exceptional. Nothing like we aren't doing anything that everybody else on the planet couldn't be doing. And so if there was motivation there, for that information campaign, I agree with you that I think you could monetize the information, but there's not many products to be monetized.
Right.
It's some daily supplements maybe, but that would be, infinitesimally small compared to, I mean, I think the vaccines were like $1,500 a shot or something like that.
Oh, wow.
That the government was paying for those. So, I mean, how many supplements do you have to put in somebody to make up for that?
Well, we don't need to get into government policy because we could probably talk for a long time about that kind of stuff without all the awareness that we would need.
And we won't change anything. So.
Right. It's just
we should just stick with what we can change.
Right. It's just I want to make the statement that it's astounding. Like I got vaccinated and in hindsight I feel like I got bamboozled, frankly.
Yeah.
But I got it because it was like, oh, you won't be able to give COVID to your parents. or to
Right.
other people of older ages. And I was like, all right, well, I'll do my part there and I'll make sure that I'm not a danger to somebody else. And it was all bullshit.
That was the most effective part
Yes.
of that was the most effective move they had, was
Yes.
making about public health and safety of others. Yeah.
Yes. But the thing that's striking to me is everything the government purports to do is to try to put more money into the individual's pocket at the end of the line, right? Like if someone could actually do that, they'd be able to have 17 in a row, 17 4-year terms in a row until they were dead. Everyone was like, fuck the Constitution. That's our president forever. And I feel like the reason that doesn't happen is in large part because of human nature, of the people who are less motivated to actually take agency over their own lives, and they want somebody else to save them. And I think that we end up in the situation where you show up at the doctor's office, and instead of saying, hey, I get a little bit of knee pain when I do this and I'm struggling to sleep, and I want to be able to eliminate the knee pain without giving up activity, and I want to get to sleep without a CPAP. What do I need to do? Instead, they're like, what do I need to do to get rid of my knee pain and sleep better? And they get a CPAP and a brace.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's, I'd be a little more generous to the population in that it's a lot of it is confusion, right? I mean, like I do health optimization and wellness medicine for career, and I've been doing it for a long time. And I have a lot of academic credentials to be able to do that. And it's still confusing for me, right? Because the research comes out all the time and you don't know what's good research until you really dig through it, and you don't have time to dig through all of it. And this guy's really smart and he's saying that, and it's the opposite of what I thought here. So I think that, the move forward, like what would get people to not need and to not rely on healthcare so much, is a better education for the healthcare providers. But the American Academy of Medical Graduate Education sets the curricula for medical schools and for nursing schools and chiropractic schools and everything else, right? Like all of those have some governing body, and the medical world, the governing body is the academic researchers, and they're getting all of their funding from pharma, essentially. Right. I don't think it wasn't like a deliberate plan that somebody sat there and connived on, but it was like, hey, this is what we believe the solution is, to make pills and potions to fix things. And that's kind of the way medicine got built out. Now, I know a lot of doctors that don't know anything about nutrition. They don't know anything about the benefits of exercise. They don't know anything about controlling stress. They don't know anything about sleep. When I first started dealing with sleep, I didn't know anything about sleep. Nothing. I went to medical school, didn't have a single class on sleep, not one. And, when I first started wondering if sleep could be the performance problem that, could be causing the performance problems that the SEALs were complaining to me about, I didn't have any idea, because I didn't really know what happened when you slept. I had to learn all of that on my own. So I think if people knew that there were easy solutions, I think if people knew how little exercise it takes to get the benefit of exercise, I mean, it's ridiculous. Yeah. It's ridiculous how little exercise you need to make a big difference. If you don't exercise at all, 10 minutes a day is huge, right? That's a night and day difference. If you just, after you eat dinner, you walk around the block, like something that simple is so, if people had any idea of how powerful that was and how powerful it was to turn off the television an hour earlier and to get an extra hour of sleep, like I think the general population just doesn't know that. And somebody like I don't have a platform to get that information out. Like you and I can do podcasts and, whatever, do a little bit of media, do a little bit of television here and there, but it's like that's not reaching the masses in a meaningful, powerful way. No,
it's missing the consistency of the reach. It's the reach plus the consistency, which is right. You got to figure both out. I want to ask you one last lifestyle question. Then I want to ask you about the sleep remedy product, because I'm really very curious. Falling asleep watch, like not falling asleep. You watch TV right until the moment you go to bed. You turn the TV off, you go to sleep, and you fall asleep in 5 minutes. Did the TV have any negative effect on your ability to sleep with quality?
Depends on if you had any sort of blue blocking going on, right? So blue light going into your eyes will interfere with the neurochemistry. So, super quickly we evolved to go to sleep when the sun went down, for reasons that we talked about earlier. The primary cue for us is the lack of blue light, most likely because the sky's blue. And so we have nerve cells in the back of our eye, in our retina that don't have anything to do with vision. They just sense blue light. When the blue light goes away, they spark a pathway that eventually leads to the pineal gland secreting melatonin. That's like the starter pistol for everything to start changing in the brain to get your brain ready to go to sleep, which takes about 3 hours. So if you look at hunter-gatherers that still live today that have never experienced electricity, they go to sleep about 3 hours after the sun goes down. If you go out camping, something like that, right, and you don't have any electric lighting with you and you just use campfires, whatever, you'll fall asleep about 3 hours after the sun goes down. That's just about the amount of time that it takes. Now, the melatonin, the blue light going down and the melatonin secretion changing neurochemistry, that's the first step. That's the initiation. One of the primary neurochemical changes is the increase of a neurotransmitter called GABA, or it's a neuropeptide, not a neurotransmitter. Oh, excuse me. GABA stands for gamma aminobutyric acid. And what it does is it slows down the neocortex. So the neocortex is the part that sits on that lizard brain, that midbrain. It's the part that we think of when we think of a human brain, that wrinkly, part with all the little crevices in it. That is how we interact with the world. It has all of our sensory in it, and it has all of our motor in it. It has all of our processing. So when we sense things, we think about it, we process it, we figure out what it means, and then we engage our motor activity to whatever extent we need to interact with the world. That's not making us breathe. It's not making our heart rate. It's not adjusting our blood pressure or anything like that. That's all the lizard brain. So it's the neocortex that needs to slow down, because that's how we interact with the world. And the definition of being asleep basically is there's a barrier between you and your environment. And that barrier is just a lack of awareness. It's a lack of interaction, a lack of attention. You can overcome that by stimulating yourself and engaging with your environment, right? So you can not have any electricity and the sun go down, and 3 hours later you can go run. You could do something super physical. You can go out to a nightclub or whatever. You go to a bar, and it could be a dark, dim, candlelit bar, but you're interacting with people, you're talking, you're sexually attracted to somebody, whatever, like all those things, you can overcome it. So if the television is causing some sort of stimulation, if you're watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and you haven't blocked blue light, then it's interfering with your sleep. If it's blocked blue light and you're watching Little House on the Prairie, probably not. Like, it's probably not interfering much. It's probably still not ideal. But if some people just can't slow down their brain, and I think the last time we talked about that stress worksheet, didn't we? About the PDF I have about like how to get stress out of your sleep. Yes. And we could link that for you. We could create a link for you for send your people to that. We do. We just choose it right now. What do you want? docparsley.com/ whatever you want.
Active Life.
Okay, that's it. docparsley.com/ active life. That'll be the lander. You can download this PDF on there. And that talks about how to deal with stress while you're asleep. To deal with stress, to keep it out of your sleep, which we went over in a little more detail in the last podcast. But yeah, that's my answer. If you're interfering with either one of those two things, the blue light or the amount of mental energy you're giving to your environment, then yeah, it's going to impact your sleep. Is it huge? I don't know. Is it 5%? Is it 40%? I don't know. I mean, that would depend from person to person. I don't know how you would study that. I don't know that has been studied.
Right. Yeah. It's one of those.
It wouldn't be ideal. So like when we have our ideal line,
right. Supplement.
You're not coming as close as you could for sure.
Right. I follow. Man, there's still so much I want to ask you, but I want to learn about the sleep remedy product. When I've talked to people about, like, because a lot of people ask me, what do you take to go to sleep? I'm like, I'm generally tired at bedtime and I go to sleep. I usually don't take anything. But if you want to take a supplement, I've been telling people the person I trust to produce a product that I believe would be efficacious, non-harmful, non-habit forming, and leave you with good sleep would be you, Dr. Kirk Parsley. And that your product,
I appreciate that.
You're welcome. And the product that you've created is Sleep Remedy. And one of the first questions that I got asked about it was, there's vitamin D in it though. Isn't that going to keep me awake at night? And so I'd love for you to answer that. And then kind of just, you don't need me to ask the prompts on the rest. What else is in it and how does it help them sleep?
Yeah. So, I mean, I can handle all that in one fell swoop, really. So, you know, for anybody who didn't hear in our last podcast, you know, the whole reason this came to my attention is, you know, the SEALs were coming to see me with something that we've now written up officially in the medical literature is called operator syndrome. I was calling it SEAL syndrome back then. But it was basically this combination of, you know, lack of concentration, lack of memory, lack of mental focus, lack of motivation, lack of emotional control, like a lot of emotional lability, as we call it. So going from super angry to super sad to bored to depressed, just like all over the place for no apparent reason. Don't really know what the triggers are. Poor physical performance. So like essentially getting slower and weaker, colder, losing muscle mass, and putting on excess body fat. So body composition shifts, but they were doing everything right. I mean, they were working with the nutritionist, they were working with their strength and conditioning coach. So by, a lot of them were taking supplements. And so by their standards, they should be performing great. They weren't, right? They're having these problems. Somewhere along the line, it occurred to me, well, maybe the fact that almost all of them are taking Ambien, and the ones who are taking Ambien and the ones who aren't taking Ambien are usually using alcohol before they go to sleep. So that forced me to learn, okay, how could Ambien be causing any of this? Could alcohol be causing any of this? And what I found was that, we talked about earlier how deep sleep is the most anabolic time. It's when you're repairing. It's when your immune system is fighting off viruses and bacterial infections and repairing damage and all this stuff. And then the REM sleep's when your brain's reorganizing and emotionally categorizing and learning and all that type of stuff. So you need both of those, right? That's deep sleep and REM sleep. You need both of those, and they need to happen in a predictable pathway, predictable patterns should be good quality of sleep. And alcohol destroys deep sleep. It gets rid of about 80% of deep sleep and about 20% of REM, and then sleep drugs do the opposite. So when I send these SEALs to do their sleep studies, not only did they all have sleep apnea, they all also had like 99.9% stage 2 sleep. So they weren't getting any deep sleep, any REM sleep. And I was like, okay, well, we obviously need to get rid of these things. But they were taking sleep drugs and they were using alcohol because they couldn't sleep. So I couldn't just say, quit doing those things and sleep anyway. So I had to say, okay, what can I get them to sleep? So I just started looking for like what supplements work to help you go to sleep. And there was a million things. You go to PubMed and it's like, this kind of lemongrass and this herb and that and this, and it was really, it was just overwhelming to me. And I'm not going to become, I'm not going to become a botanist or a naturopath or Chinese medicine specialist or something. So I'm not going to understand all these herbs. So I'm like, all right, what's normal physiology? Well, normal physiology, we talked about already. Sun goes down, melatonin gets secreted, GABA comes out, GABA slows down the neocortex. bunch of other changes happen. But a lot of people in America, at least, are usually familiar with what we call the tryptophan coma, the Thanksgiving Day nap on the couch. You eat a bunch of turkey and you fall asleep, right? Because of tryptophan. Everybody knows the key word. It's tryptophan. Right. Well, what is tryptophan? Well, it's an amino acid, and it's in all meat. Turkey doesn't have an exceptionally high amount of it. There's also some rebound from the carbohydrates that are causing this, but we'll stick with the tryptophan. So the reason tryptophan causes you to be sleepy is because tryptophan becomes 5-hydroxytryptophan. And then with the help of vitamin D3, which is actually a hormone, and magnesium, you need both of those. Then you can convert 5-hydroxytryptophan into serotonin. Serotonin can become melatonin. Melatonin is in the starter pistol. It gets everything going. You release GABA. GABA slows down the neocortex, makes you feel drowsy, and you go to sleep. So what's in my product? Tryptophan, 5-hydroxytryptophan, vitamin D3, magnesium, a very, very small amount of melatonin, because I don't want to take over your melatonin production, and I don't want to give you a super physiologic dose of melatonin. I want you to have the initiation dose of melatonin, right? So from the time the sun goes down until the time you wake up, your brain will produce about 6 micrograms of melatonin. So if you're taking a 1 milligram tablet of melatonin, and I've seen 50 milligram tablets of melatonin, if you're taking 1 milligram of melatonin, well, you're getting 1 milligram all at once instead of 6 micrograms over 12 hours or 10 hours or whatever.
Well,
so
there's
too much.
There's 1,000 micrograms in 1 gram for people who are listening. So if you're taking a 10 milligram melatonin, that's going to be 10,000 micrograms, when the normal amount that your body is producing to go to sleep is 6 micrograms over the course of
throughout the entire night.
Right.
The entire night you're doing 6 micrograms. Yeah. So it's a huge overdose, and what it does is it downregulates receptors. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter if you have the hormone if you don't have the receptor to bind to it. And your body is a smart machine. If you have an excess of a hormone around, then your body quits making so many receptors, right? If I have 1,000 times more melatonin than I need, then I can get away with 1/1000th of the melatonin receptors. Mm-hmm. Because why should my cells go through the energetic activity of making that receptor when they only need 1/1000th as many as they used to have? Now, if you take away the melatonin that you're taking, and you have normal amounts of melatonin in your brain, you're melatonin deficient because you only have 1/10 or 1/100th or 1/1000th of the receptors. I also put GABA in my product. GABA doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier very, very well. It does cross, but not great. L-theanine helps GABA work better. It's another amino acid. It increases the efficacy of what GABA does get in your brain, and that does cross into the blood-brain very, very well. But also GABA is produced in your gut brain, right? So you have about 30% as many neurons in your inside your gut that you do in your brain, and those are also producing melatonin. Those are also slowing things down and all that stuff. So, and they use GABA to decrease peripheral nerve interaction, and that's decreasing your awareness to sensation and touch and all that, and temperature and all that stuff. And then I have GABA in my product, and I have L-theanine, and then just recently I added phosphatidylserine, just because the research on phosphatidylserine is decreasing cortisol levels. And what I find 90% of the people I work with, whether they're my annual clients or just people I do one-offs with, or I still work with a lot of SEALs and Special Forces guys. 90% of those people have excess stress hormones, excess cortisol, and so that's interfering with their sleep. So I have a little bit of that in there. I have like 50 milligrams of that in there. That's not enough for most people if they're really stressed. I usually recommend taking a little more phosphatidylserine on top of it. But otherwise, I always tell people, like, my metaphor for it has always been, I'm bringing lumber to the construction site.
Right. You got to put it together.
That's it. Right. If you don't have a construction crew, nothing's going to happen. It's just going to sit there. Get stolen by kids to make skateboard ramps.
What's the use of vitamin D? Why the vitamin D in the supplement?
Because the conversion from 5-hydroxytryptophan, the 5-HTP to serotonin requires vitamin D3 and magnesium.
Got it. And so
I'm just making sure that you have it. Now, the people who think, oh, if your vitamin D3 levels go up, then your body's going to perceive that you're in the sun, that there's no correlation to that whatsoever. In fact, the vitamin D3 that your body using during the day is almost certainly not the vitamin D3 that you're making during the day. It's a little bit of that, but vitamin D3, again, it's a hormone. It's fat soluble. It's stored in all your fat cells. So when you're taking a supplement of it, it's lasting in your bloodstream until it's absorbed into your fat cells anyway. There's no mechanism in your brain to go, oh, vitamin D3 is high, therefore it must be daytime. There's no sensory for that because it's a fat soluble, stored in your fat and mobilized as you need it.
So one last question that I have to ask you, just because my curiosity is off the charts about this. All of this wearable and app technology that claims to measure your sleep. I imagine there's some variance in the ability for them to measure it, but I've had a phone next to my bedside that was like, you slept like, I'm like, how do you know? You're not even attached to my body. You're a foot away from my head. And wearables on my wrist measuring HRV and things of that nature. I don't wear them because I'm not a big believer, but I'm curious in your thoughts, are those things accurately measuring sleep?
The way I use those, so it's hard to change, as you know, it's hard to change anything that you don't measure, right? You have to be able to quantify it to some degree. Now, I have lots of, because my private program is expensive, a lot of my clients are older, right? My age or older. So, a lot of them in their 60s and even some in their 70s. They don't have any interest in any sort of computer gadget. Like they already hate the technology they have to use. Right. And I don't encourage them to do anything with that. If you're like those people, I just say, just journal, just get a little notepad, throw it next to your bed, write down, when you wake up in the morning, write down what time you went to sleep, what time you woke up. Do you remember anything during the night? And then before you go to bed at night, write down how you felt that day. And then you'll find out kind of, we'll figure out like what's working for you and what's not through that. The wearables, I recommend people do the same thing. Keep in mind, the wearable is an algorithm. An algorithm is a computer model. The world's response to COVID was based off of a computer model, right? So just keep this in mind. These are just models. Google has an algorithm. Facebook has an algorithm. Instagram has an algorithm. They're going to show you what they want you to see based off an algorithm. It's an approximation. It's a calculation. So I would never say we need to keep working on your sleep until your Garmin says you had 100% sleep score or your Oura Ring said you had 100%. Like that's not how it works. We use it so that we have some framework of measuring it, right? And so we can say, well, as an example, I think the Oura is probably the most accurate at measuring what it's measuring. I'm not saying its algorithm is necessarily the most accurate, but because it's using arterial blood supply, it can get closer, because it's on your finger, it can get really close to the artery. It takes a lot less energy. And the arterial is a better metric than venous blood supply. And it pulses more frequently because it's low energy. So it's more accurate at measuring what it measures. I'm not saying, again, that it's more accurate in this algorithm than the Garmin or the Apple Watch or the Fitbit or whatever the hell, the Whoop band, all of those things, they all have an algorithm. All I want to know is, what does your wearable say when you feel great? All right. When you feel like you're at your best, when you feel like, man, I really like today, I woke up feeling great and I had a great day. would your wearable say that day? If that's 60,
right,
then we're going for that 60. But really, the most useful thing about them is like, how long did you sleep? I've had an Oura Ring tell me that I got 100% deep sleep. That slept for 8 hours and 100% of that was deep sleep. I've also had it say I had 0% deep sleep. Right. Neither one of those are possible.
Right.
But it did measure how long I was asleep, and it did measure my pulse probably accurately. It probably got my heart rate variability accurately. And so if I have some concerns about whether or not I've been sleeping well enough to exercise intensely, I might use that heart rate variability as a gauge for how hard I'm going to work out. And that's a short intermittent thing. If it's telling me that my heart rate variability always sucks and I feel great and I'm working out and I'm making gains, then I'm not going to pay that much attention to it. But if it's an intermittent thing, I'm not sure, I don't feel like I slept that great, and I woke up today and my heart rate variability score is a lot worse than it usually is, I'm going to believe it for that day, maybe 2 days. But it's really just good to get a baseline and say, here's how much I'm sleeping. This is what my heart rate's averaging. One good thing you can do with that is you can show people, hey, if you load a bunch of high glycemic index in your diet, in your dinner, and you go to bed, you'll see a big change in your sleep quality and probably your sleep duration and your heart rate. If you drink alcohol, you'll see a big change in that. If you're dehydrated, you'll see a big change in heart rate and heart rate variability as well. So you can kind of use it in that respect, but for the most part, it's an alternative to a journal. I wouldn't say it's necessarily any better than the journal. The heart rate variability science, I believe in. The measurement of it, I'm not 100% convinced with.
I appreciate that.
But it's better. It's better than nothing. But
not necessarily better than the journal.
It's only better. It's only better than nothing.
Right.
I don't know how much better. It's at least 1% better than nothing, but I don't know how much better.
I appreciate the thoroughness of your answer on that and all the other questions I asked you today.
You're welcome.
Dr. Parsley, I'll make sure people know where to find you in the show notes, where they find your sleep remedy. And I appreciate you coming back on.
All right. I appreciate you having me back on. I need a soapbox for anybody to hear me. So
I got you. I'm going to line up.
I don't have the work ethic to do my own podcast.
Thanks again. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Active Life podcast. Please remember, give us a hand, rate it, review it wherever you listen to shows. We are on a mission to humanize the healthcare industry by professionalizing the fitness industry to empower the individual to live a life unlimited by the way that their body looks, feels, or performs. If you are inspired by that mission and want to jump on the wagon, find us anywhere. Active Life Professional on Instagram, Active Life RX on Instagram. Come to me personally at Dr. Sean Pastuch. We want to welcome you onto the train. We want you to be a part of the mission. We want to offer you the opportunity to pursue this right alongside us. We're inspired by your effort, and we hope to help you in your journey. Turn pro.